And Laurence, typically I'd come straight to you on a forecast, a call for US growth, for Europe, etc. I want to come to you on a number you guys have put out this morning. Vaccinations are key for the recovery. They would only cost $50 billion. $50 billion in the context of how much we've spent over the last 18 months is nothing. How do you get there? How do you get to that number?
So the way we've getting to that number, sorry about this, basically, the 50 billion is what's been estimating by COVAX and all the related institutions. The 10 trillion is actually what the G20 has been providing into fiscal support to their economy, to people, to firms, to jobs. So when you balance things out, 10 trillion for supporting our economy going through the pandemic, compared with the tiny 50 billion to bring the vaccine to the entire world population, that looks completely disproportionate.
Well, right now we're dealing with the Omicron variant, the idea that Africa has an incredibly low vaccination rate. Have you heard from member nations that they are accelerating, doubling down some of their aid to try to distribute vaccines in Africa and in other places that are really underserved?
So what our health department here at the OECD and the trade department noticed that it's very difficult to bring it to Africa. As you say, it's where the rate of vaccination is very low. There's a huge logistic questions, right? Bringing not only the vaccine, but being able to keep it at the right temperature and then distribute it around. So that's where I think a lot of the effort now has to focus on. But not only. If we go back to the OECD, and that's what we showed this morning, even within OECD countries and advanced economies, some countries have very low vaccination rate, and that's an issue because, as we've seen, for example, in some of the Eastern European countries, they just had led them to put in place restrictions to mobility and economic activity again. So really, expanding vaccination, making sure people get double or triple vaxxed is key to a sustained recovery.
In the meantime, Laurence, there is a problem when we talk about the hiking cycle for the Federal Reserve, when we talk about the Bank of England going to a similar type of mode, at the same time that you are seeing the potential for additional variants to slow the economy. What's the risk that we get a slowdown in economic growth at the same time as surging inflation and central banks being forced to tighten into that?
Look, there's lots of uncertainty, and there is no question that its new variant is adding to this uncertainty. Now, one of the things we're very clear about is there's no one-size-fits-all policy. The inflation in the US is very different from the inflation you may see in Asia, for example, in China or India. And it's, again, very different from the one you see in continental Europe or in the UK. And for that reasons, we have a very clear message. If inflation tensions mostly come from the supply side, then central banks should look through. When you have a lot of momentum in the recovery, excess demand, employment back where it was, then normalizing monetary policy is not something that's extraordinary and should be done.
Laurence, Tom Keenan, good morning to you on radio and television. Laurence Boone with us with the OECD as they reassess the global economy. We'll do that again with key economic data today, including ADP. Laurence, I did a very careful study of John Byrne Murdoch's magnificent work at the FT on cases and particularly deaths from COVID. The vector, the trend, called the log vector of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland is nothing short of grim. Can OECD extrapolate out the trends that we see in deaths from COVID, or do you sit back and wait for more data?
Look, good morning to you, and thanks for the invitation again. At the OECD, we're economists, so what we do is we take into account the uncertainty that has increased with the emergence of the new variant. We take into account the uncertainty that has increased because Delta is developing faster in countries where there's less vaccination, and we factor that in. But I think that's the best we can do. Again, we've warned about the uncertainty that was coming from the lack of vaccination. We've warned about the threat that this total imbalance between countries very vaccinated and those where they're just mildly or where the vaccines has not gone yet was creating. And the risk that's creating this, what's happening now is just a reminder that we need to find this 50 billion, that will help us end all these imbalances and the stress that the virus is creating on the global economy.